wait to see people start coming online. Okay, so we have a couple of people. Okay, let's start. So hello everybody and welcome to this fifth webinar in the APECS and EPB webinars series. My name is Joseph Nolan from the European Polar Board, and today we will be listening to Chloe Hill, the Policy Officer at the European Geosciences Union, who will discuss Horizon Geoscience and EU research funding. Before we start, if anybody has questions at any point throughout the presentation, we'll save them till the end. You can ask those either in the type. You can either type them in a box at the bottom. You press there's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and then I can put those to Chloe at the end. Or there is a way, if you press the button, to indicate you would like to ask your question via audio, and you can do that instead if you'd like. But without further ado, I'll pass over to Chloe.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joseph. So, yep, as Joseph was saying, my name is Chloe Hill, and I am the Policy Officer for the European Geosciences Union, or the EGU. And today I'm going to be talking to you about EU funding. So there's a couple of different research funding programs I'll be talking to you about, the current one and the future one. So I'm really glad you could join me today, and we will just jump into it. I think the presentation today should probably take about 40 minutes, maybe 45, but as Joseph said, feel free to ask any questions. If you'd like me to focus on one particular area more, you can also request that I do that. And you can also ask questions at the end as well. So, jump in. All right, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, I'll be talking to you a little bit about what the European Geosciences Union is. More specifically, what I do with the European Geosciences Union as the Policy Officer. I'll then go into the Horizon 2020 research funding program. So that's the current research program that we're in at the moment. If you're doing an EU funded research project, that's where your funding's coming from. After that, we'll go into something called the Horizon 2020 Geoscience Survey results. So this is something that the EGU did, or the European Geosciences Union did, in conjunction with the European Federation of Geologists. It's a survey we ran earlier this year. Some of you might have even been involved in it, depending if you saw it advertised or not. I know the European Polar Board advertised for us as well, which was really great. So we're talking a bit more about the results of that, how many people answered the survey, some of the key things that came out of it. And then on to Horizon Europe, which is the upcoming funding program. It doesn't start until 2021, so it does seem like a long way away now. But policymakers are actually already talking about it and negotiating it. So we'll talk a bit more about that. And finally, how you can get involved. So as researchers, as scientists, maybe as early career scientists, what are the sorts of things you can do to get yourself more involved? Not just with research funding and how that's going to turn out in 2021, but also just more generally in science policy. So, and then the very final slide is just some additional resources that you should be able to click on if you want some more information about any of those things. Okay, so the European Geosciences Union. Some of you may know about us, some of you might not, so I will go over some of the basics. We are Europe's premier geosciences union, dedicated to the pursuit of excellence in the Earth, planetary and space sciences for the benefit of humanity worldwide. So we're quite broad. We do have approximately 15,000 scientific members. This is from all over the world, but specifically most members do come from Europe. And we have 22 different scientific divisions. So this is a huge range. For polar researchers, the cryospheric sciences division is probably the most relevant, but within a lot of you can probably relate all of our divisions actually somehow to polar research. So biogeosciences, for example, we also have a climate division, we have an ocean sciences division, natural hazards obviously, so all of those things you can sort of link them somehow. And our current president is Jonathan Bamber, who is actually a physicist and glaciologist as well. So there's a lot of links that are there. We have probably what we're most well known for is the General Assembly that we, the General Assembly that we do every year. That's in April and it's always in Vienna. So some of you may have attended before. We also have about 15,000 people who attend that on an annual basis. It goes for an entire week and we have a lot of different sessions, including sessions for early career scientists. They range from short courses that sort of try and build up skills and that sort of thing, to great debates, which are always very exciting. And that is in April next year as the next one. So we also have some peer-reviewed open access journals. We have 17 of those. The most relevant for the polar sciences is the Cryosphere, that's the name of the journal. And we do have this huge early career science network. So the General Assembly, I mentioned a few points above, almost half of the people who go to that are early career scientists. And our definition of an early career scientist is anyone who is within 7 years of finishing their most recent degree. So it's quite broad. And of course, we also organise and facilitate a number of science and policy activities. So that is where I come in. I am the policy officer, and I try to give our members, so also other geoscientists as well, the information that they need to share their research with policymakers, to connect more with policymakers, and sort of feel like they're more involved. And I do focus on Europe. So you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm Australian, but I've lived and worked in Europe for a long time, and that is where the European Geosciences Union is based, and that is where we focus. So that is where I focus my energies. We also run a couple of different events. So this year in Brussels, we had our first dinner debate, and that involved both scientists and policymakers. And that is also where we first released the Horizon Geoscience survey report. So that's what we'll be talking about in a few slides' time. So again, if you do have any questions about this, you can always jump in, and also Google it afterwards as well. Okay, so Horizon 2020. A lot of you have probably heard of this. It is Europe's research funding framework program and is giving almost 80 billion euros of funding to research and innovation over 7 years. So it will go until the end of 2020. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see how these things are divided. There's 3 primary pillars. So there's the excellent science, there's the industrial leadership, and then there's a slide of challenges. And underneath these are some sort of overarching headings there as well. I won't explain all of these, but I'll go over a couple of the ones that I think are probably most relevant for those of you who are listening. Most of them are under the excellent science pillar. So that's the one that most researchers are focused on. The industrial leadership goes more towards the innovation side, and some researchers do work on that. But for the majority, it's things like the European Research Council or the ERC. This is a body that is based in Brussels, and they give researchers grants in a bottom-up sort of style. So this is something that really allows researchers to focus on the areas that they want to focus on. It's directed by the researcher. The only real thing that the grants that are given out are based on is the quality of the research or how successful they think the research is going to be. So there's no real other criteria that has to be met here, and that is why it is really popular among a lot of researchers, especially those who are working within fundamental sciences. So a lot of the other types of programs, especially in the industrial leadership pillar, a lot of those are really focused on applied sciences, and there's not so much in there for fundamental researchers, which is one of the things that scientists commented on when we ran our Horizon Geoscience survey earlier this year. Something else that might be of interest to those of you listening is something like the JRC, which you can see right down the bottom there. This is the Joint Research Centre. As you can see, it does receive quite a lot of funding, and this is where the European Commission gets a lot of the research from. They release a lot of reports that I think are quite interesting. A lot of these are foresight type activities, so they're looking into things like where we'll have the most water scarcity in the coming years, and they also have different programs that are also for early career scientists. They have a traineeship program, which I'll talk about towards the end of the PowerPoint today. So that's something else that quite a lot of scientists have heard of before. The next research framework, Horizon Europe, which I mentioned briefly in the previous slide, is already being negotiated by policymakers in Brussels. So even though it's not coming into effect until 2021, it's being talked about, and that was one of the motivations that we had actually for running the survey in April. So it has been released by the Commission, who's a person who sort of suggests these ideas, and it will be debated in the coming months by the European Parliament. So for anything else that you want to know about this Horizon 2020, which will still run for the next couple of years, there is a link down the bottom. So I wrote a blog post on this a few months ago that might be of interest to some of you, so you can always have a look at that. But I'll move on for now because it is obviously a huge topic and not what we're going to be focusing on entirely today. Okay, so this is the Horizon 2020 Geoscience report. It is something I've been focusing on a lot this year. We created the survey based on issues we thought geoscientists might have, and also based on the things we knew people like the EU Commission would want to know more about. So things that the Horizon 2020 research funding program really hoped to achieve, things like collaboration between different scientific disciplines and also different countries, the success of the projects involved, if there was a diverse enough range of projects incorporated, that kind of thing. We released it during our General Assembly, so in April this year. We wrote the report shortly afterwards, so after we received all of their responses. The geoscience community does have a significant representation within European research programs, and polar researchers do as well, so we wanted to give them a voice. So some way of telling policymakers what they thought about the program, what they thought could be improved on, what they really want to keep in the upcoming Horizon Europe framework program. Because while there are quite a lot of different surveys that are run by people like the European Commission, there weren't any that were specifically focused on geoscientists or a specific science group. So we really wanted to provide geoscientists and also our members with that opportunity. It was primarily aimed at researchers who would have liked to have been involved in Horizon 2020, or who were involved in Horizon 2020, or who plan to take part in the upcoming Horizon Europe framework program. So that's what it looks like just there. We will actually have I will have a link at the end of the PowerPoint so that you can go directly to the report and you can read through it for yourself. So I think the next slide, yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit more before I go on to the next slide. So this particular survey had about 35 questions in it, and not all of them had to be answered by every single survey respondent. Some weren't relevant for everyone. So some were only relevant if you had actually received funding from the Horizon 2020 framework program. And they asked both quantitative questions, so things that we could put into a graph, the yes/no type of questions, or the very good, satisfactory type of questions. And then we also asked more qualitative questions. So this is where we wanted to get some more depth from the scientists who were answering the survey about what they really thought, or why they thought a particular thing. And so it was quite extensive, and we really only selected those results that we thought were key to put into the report. So it's already quite summarised. But in the next couple of slides, I'll give you some more key results, so you can sort of see what it was about a little bit more. Okay, So there were 271 geoscientists who answered the survey. And from these people, there was over 100 different Horizon 2020 projects. So I say over 100 because some people put some very sort of vague overarching programs in there, which was a little bit difficult to count, but there were definitely at least 100 projects that people who answered the survey were involved in. Some of those that I've outlined here have quite long names, but these are the ones that are more related to the polar sciences that people who answered this survey had participated in. So you can see there's one on Southern Ocean prey and predators, there's Applicate, which the whole thing after that is the name of the project, and then there's Blue Action, so Arctic impacts on weather and climate. So I haven't actually looked into these programs very extensively, but we actually asked the participants themselves whether they thought these projects were successful or not, and then we asked the qualitative question of why or why not they were successful, and this is what we got. So this was only asked to those participants who had completed projects within the Horizon 2020 program, so they were awarded funding and then they had already completed the project. It was, yeah. So if someone hadn't completed the project, you can see there's 31% in grey. They're unsure, hadn't completed it. All the rest had. And actually, I was quite surprised by these results. I didn't think they would be as positive as they were. So 10% of people thought that the project outcomes were exceeded. Their expected outcomes were surpassed. And 36% said the project's outcomes were achieved. Which I think is great. Only 3% of people said the project outcomes were not achieved at all. So I think this is something that a lot of policymakers were quite pleased to see. We did release this report at the event in Brussels in September, and it was actually mentioned in a couple of times during the high-level panel, for example, that they were quite pleased to see this result. But we also went a bit further than that. Sorry, I started slow. We went a bit further than that, and we asked the participants why they thought their results had either been achieved or not achieved, and it was quite a range of reasons. A lot of people thought their results had been exceeded merely because all the people in the project really pulled their weight, which I think is really nice to hear. And then for those that weren't achieved, actually quite a few of them said it was because some partners really didn't. So in Horizon 2020 projects, it is very common for a lot of people from different areas and also different countries to work together. And this can, I think, have really good results. And it was something that actually a lot of respondents felt very positively about. But obviously it can make things challenging at times too. So, okay, one of the other questions we asked participants was the areas they thought were underrepresented within the Horizon 2020 projects. We didn't prompt any answers on this, so it was completely open for people to answer as they thought was best. And these are the general categories that I managed to come up with from the answers people gave. Now, everything that had more than 2 answers from participants is here, and participants were able to give more than 1 answer. So for the natural hazard management, that was actually by far most mentioned, and this is I only counted this as a point. People specifically mentioned the word natural hazard or hazard in there. So that actually was mentioned 17 different occasions by 17 different people. Hydrology and water resources was also mentioned a lot of times, as was raw materials. So things there that might be expected. These are also social issues as well. So a lot of people might say these as issues that will have to be dealt with in the future. Maybe water scarcity could be one of the reasons people are writing this down. But you can also see down there that people have said things like medical geology. That was a bit of a surprise, I think. And of course, polar is there as well. So that can also fit into a lot of different things. So maybe people wrote down climate. Polar could also fit in there if you're concerned about sea level rise and that sort of thing. Coastal and marine processes. It was difficult for us to sort of work out why people had said this, because we didn't ask a qualitative question afterwards. But as a quantitative answer, you can sort of take that qualitative written answer and put it into a categorized form like this, which is what we did. Okay, and collaboration was another really big one. I mentioned collaboration at the start, and this is something we focused on quite a lot in the survey, surprisingly actually, but we had 4 or 5 questions that was focused on collaboration between different sectors. So by different sectors, we were talking about industry, policy, academia, and also across different scientific disciplines. There was also one that was with different countries as well, which was also had similar result to these 2 here. You can see that the people who responded to the survey were quite positive about the impact that Horizon 2020 had on collaboration. On the left-hand side, with the collaboration across different sectors, you can see that 34% of respondents thought that Horizon 2020 had an impact to a large extent, and only 7% didn't think it had at all. Whereas on the right-hand side, with the collaboration across different scientific disciplines, 37% of people thought it had increased. The Horizon 2020 program had increased collaboration, and 45% thought it somewhat had. So that was also a big takeaway, I think, for a lot of policymakers. I saw it as a big plus, a big positive. And I think we did as well, actually. We were surprised by that result, but we're quite, I mean, it's positive. Of course, not everything in the survey came out as positive, which I'm going to talk about. One of those things was the fundamental versus applied sciences. So when we're talking about applied research here, we're talking about research that is used to solve a specific problem. So, for example, stopping flooding. It's actually taken from the cryosphere, which is one of our EGU journals. So, stopping the floods. Could we use targeted geoengineering to mitigate sea level rise? This is a very applied problem that needs applied research to solve it. But in saying that, to solve this sort of problem and to use applied research, quite often you'll need to use fundamental research first. So you'll need to use the fundamental research as a base, and that's also why fundamental research is very important. And when I'm talking about fundamental research here, I'm talking about something that aims to improve scientific theories and understanding. And so there we have another example from the cryosphere, which is the EGU journal. But the thing is, the truth of the matter is, a lot of these fundamental research projects or applied research projects are mixed. There's a mix of both fundamental and applied science. And you do quite often need both. And what a lot of respondents thought is that the balance between these two wasn't very good in the Horizon 2020 program. So 24% of survey respondents felt that the distribution between applied and fundamental science was not fair at all. With the qualitative responses that we read afterwards, they called for a larger focus on fundamental science. And this was actually something that the qualitative answers throughout the entire survey, even when it wasn't specifically asked about, said. So fundamental science was sort of a big focus of the survey. And you can see the answers here. So 22% didn't have an opinion, that's fine, or they weren't sure about it. But 24% thought that it wasn't fairly distributed at all, and only 6% thought it was distributed completely. So when I'm talking about qualitative answers, I'm not reading them out because some of them are quite long. So you can see as an example of a qualitative answer down the bottom here. So it seems as though the focus of Horizon 2020 was more on applied research, the results of which can have immediate application and impact. It seems though the more fundamental or pure research topics receive less attention, if not lesser amounts of funding. However, the two types of research work in tandem to provide longer-term measurable solutions. I really like this quote. So I was really impressed with some of the answers we got, especially in the qualitative section. And I think this just puts it so well. A lot of people said something similar to this, and that's how we selected a lot of the qualitative quotes. But this is just, it's written very, very well. So I couldn't have said it better myself. And so this is something that a lot of other organisations who are somehow invested into research or research funding have also said, so there's different organisations like the Guild, the League of European Universities, they've all commented on this balance as well, and it's something that they are calling for more of. And unfortunately, I'm not sure whether the next funding program, Horizon Europe, is going to have this balance that people are asking for. But I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So right now, actually. So even though a lot of research organisations are putting out position statements about this sort of thing, a lot of national organisations are as well. They're doing this at the moment, they've done this already, and this is because it's still a negotiation process. The Horizon Europe is being talked about now, but there's still quite a long way to go. So they're talking about having 100 billion euros for science and research and innovation projects between 2021 and 2027. This is more than Horizon 2020, so that's the current framework program. Horizon 2020 has almost 80 billion, so this is a significant increase, but a lot of research organisations obviously want more. And of course, a lot of people in our survey also said that, although we didn't specifically include it in the report, just because I think it's already quite obvious and it's already been stated. So that is something that potentially could increase. It probably won't, but it potentially could. Horizon Europe will be a mission-orientated and will have a mission-orientated and problem-solving approach to fuel innovation-led growth. Now, this is why one of the reasons why there has been a lot of speculation over whether there will be any increase in fundamental science in Horizon Europe. The current commission is very focused on innovation, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's necessary to boost the economy, for example. It's very, very good for small and medium-sized enterprises, and a lot of people are calling for it, especially with things when you're trying to solve a problem. It's focused, use applied sciences for that. But it hasn't been mentioned very much that fundamental science will receive more funding. The European Innovation Council is something that will be introduced in Horizon Europe, and this is also obviously more of an applied approach. And also there has been a big focus on making Horizon Europe a bit simpler. So less bureaucracy, hopefully when you're applying for funding, it won't be quite as complicated, there won't be as many forms to fill out, or that is what people are hoping for anyway. So part two, so the Commission's proposal, which is primarily what I'm basing this on, is currently being assessed by the EU Parliament and also by the Council. So they're hoping to have a vote in late November, but these things are often delayed. There's a lot of people commenting on it as well, but it is really important that they vote on this before May 2019, because that is when the European elections are. And after the European elections, if there hasn't been a decision made, then it's quite likely that all of this will have to happen all over again. So it won't go back to the Commission, but there could potentially be a big change with the types of people that are in Parliament and the types of thinking behind those people. So all the negotiation process up to that point will have to be renegotiated, and it could take another year or so. So they are really rushing to try and get this through. The Council, on the other hand, so this is something I'm not going to go into much detail in this particular presentation. The European legislation process is relatively complicated. So there is the European Council, there is the European Parliament, and there's the European Commission. And they all play a part in this decision-making process, with the Commission usually proposing these ideas. So it proposed the initial plan for Horizon Europe, and the Council and the Parliament then make different changes and amendments to these proposals and then vote on them, essentially. It can be a bit more complicated than that, but that's the usual process. If you do want more information about this, you can always get in touch with me. We actually have a section on our website within the policy section of the EGU website that does go into a bit more detail about how this actually happens and where scientists can contribute to this process. So if you are interested, you can find that on our website. There's also quite a few videos that go through it in some detail as well. But specifically for scientists who want to contribute to the process, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. If you do have questions about that at the end of the presentation, you can ask and I can go into some more detail. Perhaps I can also just show you the part on the website that explains it. So yeah. Okay. But what would the people who responded to the Horizon 2020 Geoscience survey like to see? So I touched on some of the specific answers that we had, some of the graphs that were able to be created from the answers. But specific things that people said, more in the qualitative answers than in the quantitative answers, are displayed here. Number one, more fundamental science. As I said, this was sort of a theme throughout the whole survey. Nothing was less bureaucracy. This is something that we focused on in the report as well. It was mentioned by a lot of people. One of the problems is I think that policymakers think it's quite straightforward because they deal with it every day. Whereas scientists who might be trying to do it for the first time, it can seem quite overwhelming. Even just getting through the website, it's quite a lot. So people were really requesting less bureaucracy. Another idea that quite a few people came up with was a tapering of funding towards the end of the project. So a lot of people felt that their projects were successful, but they were worried about what would happen in 2 to 3 years' time when the funding had run out, when they no longer had the time to manage the website, for example. So what would happen after that? And they suggested that maybe the project could have some funding that goes for an extra 2 to 3 years, but very minimal amounts that would really extend the life of these projects. The next point is the inclusion of more Eastern European and third country involvement. So third country is basically anyone who's not within the EU, including places like Australia. The quote down the bottom actually relates to this particular bullet point. So actually, I changed that. That's the next bullet point. So yeah, a lot of people thought that involving these countries more actually would have benefits within Europe because some countries do different aspects better. The example given was resource recycling. Apparently one wasn't, I swear it wasn't me, but one respondent said Australia does that quite well. And that's something that Europe could actually learn from. So things like that. The project evaluation panels. At the moment, a couple of people said they weren't diverse enough. There wasn't enough scientific disciplines within these panels, so they felt that maybe their project wasn't receiving the attention it deserved. The next one was something that's already been touched on, so the need for more natural hazard management, hydrology, water management, and raw material projects. So that includes things like circular economy. The inclusion of smaller grants that have a shorter application process. So this was mentioned under the less bureaucracy bullet point, and actually throughout the survey as well. Having smaller grants, you would think should have a shorter application process or less bureaucracy associated with that. Of course, keeping the larger projects is important as well. And the last point that was mentioned is more early career scientist opportunities. So this is where the quote down the bottom comes from. So better conditions for supporting the contracting of young scientists by companies. And this is something I've actually heard for the first time at our General Assembly in April. We had a session that was based on scientists in industry, and a lot of people in that session were in academia and just didn't know how to get across to industry. So this is something that a lot of early career scientists thought could be an opportunity. Another one would be more internships and things like that, which I'm actually going to talk about on the next slide. And it's not something that we included in our report, and that's for a specific reason. So the report that I'm mentioning, the Horizon Geoscience survey report, it was targeted at policymakers. and trying to encourage them to listen to research about what they thought was needed more. But in terms of society and Europe in general. So we tried to make it seem as selfless as possible. And of course, there was people requesting lots more money for funding and lots more money for research and more opportunities for scientists. But policymakers who are focusing on Horizon Europe, actually what they really want to do is work out what is best for meeting societal challenges. That's the tagline. And it's important because that's what's being used to fund this research is taxpayer money. And that's also what gets them voted in if they're in the parliament, for example. So this is something that we do bring up from time to time, that early career scientists do need more support, and that's why we have a big network within the European Geosciences Union. And we did include it somewhere in the report. That's why the quote is down there in blue. That's also in the report, but we didn't have a specific section on it. Okay. All right, so can scientists still help shape Horizon Europe? So unfortunately, the Horizon 2020 Geoscience Survey has finished. We have published the report, but there are other ways that you can get involved if you would like to. A lot of the ways that are mentioned are a little bit more roundabout. So for example, keeping an eye on upcoming events and joining them where possible. Basically just improving your network, getting in touch, talking face to face, making some sort of connection is always helpful. And so one example of this is STOA's MEP Science Pairing Scheme. Now STOA is created by the Parliament, and they run this. Actually, sorry, I can't remember the acronym right now. But they run an MEP, so member of the European Parliament, and a scientist pairing scheme every year, or almost every year. And this actually pairs specific scientists who apply and who have been selected with MEPs who have shown interest in learning more about science. And they shadow each other, and they learn more about what it takes to be in that particular role. So the MEP visits the scientist visits the MEP, learns a bit more about their lives and also what they need more of. And as a scientist, if you want to get more involved in policy, knowing what the policymaker needs is actually one of the most important things. So getting involved in that, and also, yeah, just having some sort of personal connection is quite important. Another way you might like to get involved is to sign a petition. So these were going around earlier this year to increase the funding from 100 billion to 160 billion euros for Horizon Europe, which is quite a large jump. That particular petition now has finished, but if nothing is passed by May, then it's likely that another petition might be opened up. You can also answer surveys like the Horizon 2020 Geoscience Survey, or you can join events such as Evidence Matters. Evidence Matters is something that was run by Sense About Science and tries to connect people with the European Parliament. It takes them in there. And this particular event, all the people who joined, I mean, you had to apply to join, but all the people who joined got 1 minute to say exactly what they wanted to see more of and why evidence mattered to them. Another thing you can do all year round, you can do in 15 minutes from your computer, is to answer an EU consultation. The EU consultation process is usually the beginning of a legislative process. It's run by the EU Commission, so the people who propose legislation. And there was one run about Horizon Europe quite early on, so about 1.5 years ago now. It's likely that throughout Horizon Europe, another one of these surveys will be run, another one of these consultations will be run to get people's feedback on it. So a consultation is generally a short questionnaire that's open to everyone. It's open to the public, it's open to industry, it's open to scientists. Sometimes they will request specific groups answer. So for example, if it's something to do with shipping or marine coastal processes, they might specifically ask people who work in that sort of sector to answer. but everyone is still welcome to answer if they would like to do so. Quite often they can be a little bit complicated, so if it's to do with some sort of prior legislation, you might have to read a document before you answer the questionnaire. But if you are a scientist and you are working particularly with polar research, there are a lot of consultations uploaded that could be relevant for you and could help you get more involved in the process or know what's coming up in the near future. So it's definitely worth checking out, and just having a look at one actually before you sort of delve into it can give you an idea about what they are exactly. Another way to get involved would be to join or to undertake a science policy internship or placement. There are quite a few of these. Two of the biggest ones is the EU Commission's 5-month Blue Book traineeship. So this has 1,300 placements annually, and it's not just for students, it's also for graduates. It's also people who are currently undertaking their PhD and want to see what else is out there. I think it's hugely beneficial. I know quite a few scientists who have done a Blue Book traineeship, gone back to being a scientist, but they still sort of can understand the system a little bit better, and I've never heard of anyone doing one and not recommending it. So there's a link there if you'd like to have a look at that. And then there's the JRC, so the Joint Research Centre also has a 3 to 5 month traineeship scheme, and that one is targeted more at scientists. So the Blue Book traineeship is open to everyone, and the Joint Research Centre is sort of more specifically science related. But within that, there's a huge, broad range of scientific disciplines included. And what else can you do? So this is more the broad things that you can do. Talk to your local member of the European Parliament, so MEP. So this is particularly relevant for those who are in the Committee of Industry, Research and Energy. They're the types of people who are really interested in research or who are negotiating the Horizon Europe program. And a lot of MEPs, especially at the moment, are very interested in hearing from you because their elections are coming up soon. So you can find MEPs that are specifically that are in your region that might want to talk to you, might be holding hearings or events, especially in the lead up to May. You can also work with a national scientific body. So if you are living somewhere in Europe or any other country, and you know of a scientific body that's specifically within your country, they might have ties to MEPs themselves. They might actually have a position on Horizon Europe. They might need scientific input from an expert. It's a good way to extend your network a bit further and get a bit more involved in science policy. And it's something that us at the EGU, we don't focus on so much because a lot of the time these national scientific bodies do work in their own languages. But if you want to do your own research, I can definitely recommend it. Sharing your research with the public is also very important. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of the funding, or all the funding actually, that goes into Horizon Europe comes from the public somehow, whether it's been allocated there by different national governments or just from taxes. It's important to share the research you're doing with the public so they know where the money's being spent and they know why research is important. And that they vote for their MEPs. If the public supports something, then the MEP is likely to support it as well. So informing the public, getting them to vote for research, it's all really important. And if you want more tips for engaging policymakers, so what's the best communication strategy, or why you should keep your communication with policymakers relatively short, that sort of thing, you can also visit the policy section of the EGU website through the link that's just on this page. And yeah, so that's it. That was the presentation today. So this page just has some more links. The survey report that I've been mentioning throughout this presentation is obviously linked just there. We've also created a shorter one that's only 2 pages. So the original Horizon 2020 Geoscience Survey report is 16 pages. The Horizon 2020 Geoscience Survey 2-page report is even more condensed and only 2 pages. You can also visit the policy section of the EGU website, or, because I'm assuming most of you are polar researchers who are listening, you can visit our EGU Cryospheric Sciences division. They also have their own webpage and their own journal as well, so you can see some of the really interesting articles that are published in there, or maybe even publish one of your own. And if you are interested in the internships or placements I mentioned in the previous slide, we do have a list that needs to be updated, but we have a relatively short-ish list of policy placements and internships that you might be interested in. And again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask them now. You can always ask them later as well. You can get in touch. My email's down the bottom. And yeah, thanks very much for listening. And thanks to Joseph for hosting me. It's been great.
Thank you very much, Chloe, for that very comprehensive overview of the survey and the results and the wider policy process affecting European research programs. We have just now a couple of minutes so we can maybe take one or maybe two very quick questions if somebody has one. You can either type that into the Q&A box. There's a button at the bottom of your screen, or you can press the button to indicate you wish to speak, and I can unmute you. I have a very quick question. How successful do you feel the survey was as a tool for engaging geosciences, and would you do something differently if you were to do it again?
I don't know if I would do something differently, but I would have tried to advertise it for longer. So we only advertised it for 2 or 3 weeks, and we got 271 answers, which was quite good, but I was sort of optimistically hoping for 1,000. But I do think it was a useful tool. I would slightly change the survey questions if I was to ask it again. There were some questions when I was evaluating the survey, thinking that question was a waste of time sort of thing. I couldn't really use it after I looked at the answers. But I think that's a learning process. I think it was a really useful tool for engaging policymakers, and it was a really, I guess, a good excuse to have this event in Brussels as well. Gave this event a bit more focus and gave people a takeaway sort of message overall as well. And it's something that I would like to distribute more, actually. Yeah.
Fantastic. I don't see any other questions just now, and we are running short of time. So I think what we will do is we'll wrap up. I'll just remind everybody that this webinar has been recorded. So we will be uploading it to the European Polar Board website. That's europeanpolarboard.org in the next few days. And hopefully we'll be able to include Chloe's slides with all the links as well. So without further ado, also I'll say keep an eye out for future EPB-APECS webinars in this series that should be coming along in the next few weeks and months. We also have the previous ones in the series available to watch again on our website. So thank you everybody for attending, and most of all, thank you very much for Chloe for a wonderful presentation.
Anytime.
Thank you. Bye-bye everybody.